Good evening, everyone. Welcome to what promises to be an extraordinary journey through one of humanity's most fascinating ancient narratives. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment below and let me know your location and local time. It's amazing to think that we're all gathered here across continents and time zones to explore this ancient mystery together. Settle in, get comfortable, maybe grab a drink and some snacks, because we're about to embark on a deep dive into the complete story of the Anunnaki, from their origins on the mysterious planet Nibiru to their profound impact on human civilization and the legacy they left behind that still captivates us today. Our story begins not on Earth, but on the far reaches of our solar system, on a planet that mainstream astronomy doesn't officially recognize, yet ancient texts describe in remarkable detail. Nibiru, also called the Planet of the Crossing. According to ancient Sumerian texts, particularly those translated by scholar Zecharia Sitchin, Nibiru follows a highly elliptical orbit around our Sun, taking approximately 3,600 Earth years to complete a single revolution. This immense orbital period means that Nibiru spends most of its time in the cold, dark outer reaches of our solar system, only periodically swinging close to the inner planets where Earth resides. Imagine a world unlike any in our immediate solar system. A planet roughly 3 to 4 times the size of Earth, with its own internal heat source that allows it to sustain life even in the frozen depths of space. This internal dynamo, generated by the planet's massive core and radioactive decay, created a greenhouse effect in Nibiru's atmosphere, maintaining temperatures capable of supporting a thriving civilization. The Anunnaki, whose name translates to "those who from heaven to earth came," evolved on this world over millions of years. They developed into a highly advanced species, mastering technologies that would seem like magic to early humans. Their understanding of genetics, energy manipulation, space travel, and planetary engineering far exceeded anything we can fully comprehend even today. But Nibiru had a problem, a crisis that would eventually drive the Anunnaki to Earth and change the course of 2 worlds forever. The ancient texts tell us that Nibiru's atmosphere began to deteriorate. The protective shield that kept the planet's heat trapped and protected its surface from cosmic radiation was breaking down. Some interpretations suggest this was a natural process, the inevitable result of Nibiru's unique orbital characteristics. Others propose it might have been accelerated by the Anunnaki's own industrial activities, an ancient parallel to our modern climate change concerns. The Anunnaki scientists, led by their brightest minds, searched desperately for a solution. They examined their planet's composition, studied atmospheric chemistry, and ran countless simulations. Eventually, they discovered a potential answer: gold. But not gold as we think of it, as mere decoration or currency. The Anunnaki discovered that gold, when processed into a specific monoatomic form and dispersed into the upper atmosphere, could create a reflective shield. These microscopic gold particles would hold in heat, reflect harmful radiation, and essentially repair their planet's failing atmospheric blanket. The problem was immediate. Nibiru had exhausted its easily accessible gold reserves. Their planet's geological evolution had placed most remaining gold deposits deep beneath the surface, too deep to mine with even their advanced technology. They needed an alternative, and they needed it urgently. Around 450,000 years ago by our calendar, as Nibiru made one of its periodic passages through the inner solar system, Anunnaki scouts detected something remarkable: a small blue planet in the habitable zone, rich with water, teeming with life, and, most importantly, abundant with surface and near-surface gold deposits. Earth was a young world, geologically active, with gold that had been brought to the surface through volcanic activity and tectonic processes. It was a paradise compared to many other worlds in the solar system, and it held the key to Nibiru's survival. The Anunnaki Council, led by their king, Anu, whose name means sky or heaven, faced a momentous decision. Should they undertake the dangerous journey to this distant world? The journey was perilous. Space travel between planets, even with their advanced technology, carried risks. And Earth, while rich in resources, was also unknown. What dangers might lurk on this primitive but vibrant world? After much deliberation, King Anu made his decision. He would send an expedition to Earth, led by his brilliant scientist son, Enki, whose name translates to Lord of Earth or Lord of the Earth Waters. Enki, known for his wisdom, creativity, and love of life in all its forms, would establish the first Anunnaki settlement on Earth and begin the gold mining operations. But this decision would set in motion events that neither Anu nor Enki could foresee, a chain of consequences that would lead to rebellion, creation, love, war, and the birth of human civilization itself. Approximately 445,000 years ago by our calendar, Enki's spacecraft descended through Earth's atmosphere. Imagine the scene: massive vessels, powered by technology we can barely conceptualize, breaking through the clouds and landing in the region we now know as Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Enki chose this location carefully. The Persian Gulf region, which in those ancient times extended much further inland than it does today, offered access to fresh water, moderate climate, and most importantly, proximity to gold deposits in what is now southeastern Africa. The first base was established and named Eridu, which would become the first city in the region and hold tremendous religious significance for thousands of years. Eridu means house in the faraway built, or home away from home, a poignant name for this alien outpost on a foreign world. Enki, ever the scientist and explorer, was fascinated by Earth. He studied its geology, its abundant water systems, its diverse ecosystem. He marveled at the life that had evolved here, so different from Nibiru, yet following the same universal principles. Primitive hominids roamed the landscape, our distant ancestors still in their evolutionary infancy, using simple stone tools and living in small family groups. Enki's team set about their mission with efficiency. They established mining operations, set up processing facilities, and began extracting gold. The precious metal was refined, prepared for transport, and periodically shipped back to Nibiru when the planet's orbit brought it close enough to make the journey practical. For a time, everything went according to plan, but Earth had a way of complicating even the best-laid plans of the gods. King Anu, seeing the success of the Earth mission, decided to expand the operation. He sent his other son, Enlil, whose name means Lord of the Command or Lord of the Wind or Storm, to take administrative command of the Earth colonies and accelerate gold production. Enlil was everything Enki was not. Where Enki was creative and curious, Enlil was commanding and authoritative. Where Enki saw possibilities, Enlil saw order and hierarchy. Where Enki had fallen in love with Earth and its primitive inhabitants, Enlil saw only resources to be extracted and a mission to be completed. The relationship between these two half-brothers would become the central tension in the Anunnaki story, a sibling rivalry that would echo through millennia and shape human destiny. Enlil established a new city called Larsa, which would later become Nippur, designed as the administrative and mission control center for all Anunnaki operations on Earth. Unlike Eridu, which had an organic, exploratory feeling, Nippur was precise, ordered, and efficient. a reflection of Enlil's personality. The division of power was clear. Enki controlled the Abzu, the mining operations in Africa and the waters that covered much of Earth, while Enlil commanded the Eden, the agricultural plains of Mesopotamia, and overall mission operations. This division satisfied neither brother entirely, and the tension between them would only grow with time. As decades turned into centuries and centuries into millennia, the Anunnaki presence on Earth grew. More personnel arrived from Nibiru with each orbital passing, building a sophisticated society that mirrored their home world's hierarchy. At the top stood King Anu, who remained on Nibiru but made occasional visits to Earth to inspect the colonies and resolve disputes. Below him, Enlil and Enki wielded tremendous power, though their areas of authority often overlapped and clashed. The extended royal family and high-ranking Anunnaki held positions of authority in various cities and operations. Among these were figures who would later be remembered as gods by the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and other Mesopotamian cultures. Ninmah, later called Ninhursag, half-sister to both Enki and Enlil, served as chief medical officer. Her expertise in biology and genetics would prove crucial in later events. Nana, Enlil's son, would oversee the city of and become associated with the moon. Utu, later called Shamash, grandson of Enlil, would become associated with the sun and justice. Inanna, later called Ishtar, great-grandson of Enlil, would become the goddess of love, war, and political power, perhaps the most complex and controversial figure in the entire Anunnaki pantheon. Each Anunnaki was assigned a rank number. Anu was 60, Enlil was 50, Enki was 40, and so on down the hierarchy. These numbers weren't arbitrary. They corresponded to positions of authority and were built into the very structure of Sumerian mathematics and timekeeping. The Anunnaki built not just mining operations and administrative centers, but a civilization. They created landing platforms for spacecraft, the Durs mentioned in ancient texts, observation posts, communication centers, and eventually beautiful cities with gardens, temples, and palaces. But there was a problem. The actual work of mining gold in the harsh conditions of southeastern Africa was brutal, exhausting, and dangerous. And the Anunnaki working in these mines were growing increasingly dissatisfied. For thousands of years, the lower-ranking Anunnaki toiled in the mines. These were not slaves, they were citizens of Nibiru, beings of the same species as their commanders, but their work was backbreaking nonetheless. The mines went deep into the earth, following gold veins through difficult terrain. The heat was oppressive, the work dangerous. Cave-ins were common, equipment broke down. And for what? So that gold could be sent back to a home world that seemed increasingly distant and abstract to those who had spent generations on Earth. Approximately 300,000 years ago, the situation reached a breaking point. The workers, exhausted and fed up, laid down their tools. They marched from the mining operations to Enlil's headquarters in Nippur, demanding relief. Ancient texts describe this event dramatically. The workers burned their tools, surrounded Enlil's house at night, and declared they would work no more. This was a full-scale rebellion, and it sent shockwaves through Anunnaki society. Enlil, characteristically, wanted to identify the ringleaders and punish them severely, restore order through discipline. But Enki, who had always been more sympathetic to the concerns of workers, saw an opportunity. He proposed a radical solution, one that would change everything. Let us create a primitive worker, a Lulu, to bear the yoke of the gods. Let us create a being to take over the mining work, someone to do the labor while the Anunnaki supervise. This being would be created not from nothing, but from something that already existed, the primitive hominids that roamed Earth, combined with Anunnaki genetic material. They would create a hybrid species, intelligent enough to follow instructions and use tools, but not equal to the Anunnaki themselves. They would create humanity. The proposal to create a primitive worker was revolutionary and controversial. It raised profound questions that the Anunnaki Council debated extensively. Do we have the right to manipulate the genetics of an existing species? What are the ethical implications of creating a being specifically to serve us? What if this creation exceeds our expectations or fails to meet them? Enlil was skeptical. He believed in working within the existing order, even if that meant continuing to pressure the mining crews to return to work. But he also recognized that something had to give. If the rebellion continued, the entire Earth mission and Nibiru's survival was at risk. Enki was enthusiastic. As a scientist and genetic engineer, he was fascinated by the challenge. He had studied Earth's hominids extensively, particularly the species we now call Homo erectus, and saw tremendous potential. These beings already walked upright, used basic tools, and lived in social groups. With the right genetic modifications, incorporating Anunnaki DNA, they could become so much more. Ninmah, the chief medical officer, was brought in as the third key figure in this endeavor. Her expertise in genetics, reproduction, and biology would be essential. Together, this trio, Enki, Ninmah, and, reluctantly, Enlil, would embark on one of the most audacious experiments in the history of either species. The work began in Enki's laboratory in the Abzu, the African region where both the gold mines and large populations of suitable hominids could be found. Ancient Sumerian texts describe this process in surprising detail that eerily parallels modern genetic engineering concepts, despite being written thousands of years before we discovered DNA. The texts describe how Enki and Ninmah extracted the essence or clay from the existing hominids, what we would call DNA. Then they mixed this with their own essence, Anunnaki genetic material. This hybrid genetic template was then implanted into birth mothers. The first attempts were failures. The texts describe beings born with various defects, some unable to hold in urine, others unable to eat properly, still others with twisted limbs or incomplete development. Each failure taught the Anunnaki scientists something new, and they refined their process. What's remarkable is how these ancient texts describe concepts that sound like genetic engineering, combining genetic material from two species, using surrogate mothers, experiencing trial and error, and gradually perfecting the process. Ancient cultures that supposedly knew nothing of modern biology somehow recorded a process that reads like a genetic engineering manual. Finally, success. A healthy hybrid infant was born, the first true human. The texts call this being an Adamu, from which we derive the name Adam. But this wasn't the Adam of later biblical tradition, not yet. This was a prototype, a proof of concept. But there was a problem. This first Adamu was male, and like many hybrid species, he was sterile. The Anunnaki could create these workers one at a time through their genetic engineering process, but this was time-consuming and labor-intensive. They needed these beings to reproduce naturally. So the experiments continued. Eventually, they succeeded in creating a female, Tiamat, later remembered as Eve, meaning life or living one. The genetic modifications continued until finally they had a breeding pair of humans who could reproduce naturally. These first humans were different from modern humans in some key ways. They were stronger, lived longer, and were more directly connected to their Anunnaki creators.
But they also lacked something: full self-awareness, the complete range of cognitive abilities that the Anunnaki possessed. They were intelligent enough to mine gold, follow instructions, and use tools, but they were designed to be workers, not equals. The texts tell us that Enki, proud of his creation, placed some of these early humans in a special facility, a garden laboratory in the Eden, the ancient Mesopotamian plains, where he could observe them, study them, and continue to refine the human design. This garden sanctuary was called Eden, literally the home of the righteous ones, and it would be remembered as the Garden of Eden. In this garden sanctuary, humans lived under direct Anunnaki supervision. They had their needs met: food, shelter, safety, but they were also restricted. They could not venture beyond certain boundaries, and most importantly, they were forbidden from accessing certain knowledge. Here's where the story takes its most famous turn, one that would be retold, reinterpreted, and debated for thousands of years. Enki had always felt a paternal affection for his human creations. As he observed them in the garden, he began to see them not just as workers, but as beings with potential, beings who deserved more than servitude. He began to question the ethics of what they had done, creating intelligent beings specifically to labor for another species. Enlil, on the other hand, saw humans exactly as intended, as workers, as tools, as a solution to the mining problem. He wanted them to remain in their place, to serve their purpose, and nothing more. The conflict between these two philosophies, Enki's progressive vision and Enlil's conservative control, would become the central drama of early human history. The texts tell us that Enki, either directly or through one of his representatives, later mythologized as a serpent, gave humans access to the fruit of knowledge, an understanding of their own situation, self-awareness, and cognitive abilities beyond what they were designed for. This wasn't literal fruit, of course. Most interpretations suggest this was additional genetic modification, upgrading human consciousness to include full self-awareness, abstract thinking, and the ability to reproduce more independently. Some ancient texts even suggest teaching humans about sexuality and reproduction so they could multiply without constant Anunnaki intervention. When Enlil discovered what Enki had done, he was furious. This wasn't the plan. Humans were supposed to be controlled, limited workers, not thinking beings who could question their status and purpose. The confrontation between the brothers was intense, with Enlil accusing Enki of sabotaging the mission and creating future problems. As punishment, or perhaps simply as a practical solution, Enlil expelled the upgraded humans from the garden. They were cast out into the wider world, forced to fend for themselves. But they were no longer just workers. They were truly human, aware, questioning, and capable of charting their own course. This expulsion is remembered in Genesis as the fall, the punishment for eating from the tree of knowledge. But from another perspective, it was humanity's first step towards freedom, our first rebellion against being controlled, our first declaration that we were more than tools.
Cast out from the garden, but now capable of independent reproduction and thought, humans began to multiply across the earth. This was the period we might recognize archaeologically as the emergence of early Homo sapiens, roughly 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, dates that align intriguingly with the timeline suggested by the Anunnaki texts. Humans spread through Africa, into the Middle East, and gradually across the continents. They carried with them the knowledge that Enki had given them, not just biological reproduction, but accumulated wisdom about tool-making, fire, social organization, and survival. But the relationship between humans and Anunnaki remained complex and multifaceted. Humans were no longer just workers, but they still lived in a world dominated by these powerful beings. Different Anunnaki had different policies toward humanity, some protective, some exploitative, some indifferent. Enki continued to watch over humanity with a sense of responsibility and pride. He saw them not as a mistake, but his greatest achievement. He intervened periodically to help them, to teach them, to protect them from the harsher policies that some Anunnaki wanted to implement. The mining continued, with humans now doing most of the labor under Anunnaki supervision. But something unexpected began to happen. Humans and Anunnaki began to interact in ways that went beyond mere master and servant. The ancient texts, particularly the Book of Enoch and Genesis chapter 6, tell us about a period when the boundaries between Anunnaki and humans became blurred in the most intimate way possible. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives from among them, any they chose. Male Anunnaki living among humans began to find human women attractive. Despite the genetic differences, the species were close enough, having been designed that way, that interbreeding was possible. These unions produced children, hybrids who carried both Anunnaki and human DNA. These hybrid offspring were called the Nephilim, meaning those who came down, or the fallen ones, and they were unlike either parent species. Ancient texts describe them as giants, as heroes, as beings of great power, and often great arrogance. They had the strength and abilities of their Anunnaki fathers, combined with the adaptability and resilience of their human mothers. But these interbreeding relationships created enormous social complications. The Anunnaki hierarchy was based on pure bloodlines and specific genetic lineage. The mixing of Anunnaki and human DNA threatened this entire system. Who was in charge? What rights did Nephilim have? What about their children? Enlil, ever the authoritarian, was horrified by this development. He saw it as a contamination of the Anunnaki species, a violation of natural order, and a threat to mission discipline. He pushed for strict laws against interbreeding and wanted the Nephilim eliminated. Enki, characteristically, was more accepting. He saw the Nephilim as proof of humanity's potential, as bridges between the two species. Some sources even suggest that Enki himself fathered children with human women, though this is debated. The tension over this issue, along with the accumulated grievances and philosophical differences between Enlil and Enki, was pushing Anunnaki society toward a crisis point. And then nature itself provided the catalyst for a catastrophe that would nearly end the human experiment entirely. Around 13,000 years ago, approximately 11,000 BCE by our calendar, the Anunnaki scientists monitoring Earth's climate and geology discovered something alarming. The Antarctic ice sheet, which had been growing for thousands of years, had reached a critical mass and was becoming unstable. Worse, Nibiru was approaching on one of its periodic returns to the inner solar system. The gravitational effects of Nibiru's passage, combined with the unstable ice mass, would trigger a massive tsunami that would circle the globe, flooding coastal regions and low-lying areas, essentially all the places where humans and Anunnaki had built their civilizations. Enki's scientists calculated the likely date and severity of this flood. It would be devastating, but survivable for the Anunnaki, who could retreat to their spacecraft and orbital facilities. But for humans, who had no such technology, it would be an extinction-level event. The Anunnaki Council debated what to do. This was the moment when the philosophical divide between Enlil and Enki would have the most profound consequences. Enlil saw this as an opportunity, perhaps even divine providence. The flood would solve multiple problems simultaneously. It would eliminate the human population that had grown so large and uncontrollable. It would destroy the Nephilim, ending the contamination of Anunnaki bloodlines. It would wipe the slate clean,
allowing the Anunnaki to start fresh with a more controlled approach to Earth's colonization. He proposed that they say nothing to the humans. Let the flood come. Let nature take its course. The Anunnaki would survive, and afterward they could decide whether to create a new, more obedient version of humanity or simply return to doing the mining work themselves with machinery. Enki was horrified by this plan. These weren't just workers anymore, they were living, conscious beings. They were his creation, his children in a very real sense. To let them die without warning when he had the knowledge to save at least some of them was unconscionable. But Enlil held the higher rank. He was commander of Earth operations, and his decision was final. The Anunnaki Council, including King Anu himself, supported Enlil's plan. They all took an oath. No one would warn the humans about the coming flood. Enki found himself bound by his oath to the council, unable to directly tell humans about the coming disaster. But Enki was clever, and his love for his human creations was stronger than his obligation to follow rules he saw as unjust. The texts tell us that Enki chose a human man named Utnapishtim, later called Ziusudra in Sumerian texts, and eventually Noah in the Hebrew tradition. This man was described as exceptionally righteous, wise, and possibly a descendant of the Anunnaki bloodline himself, perhaps even one of Enki's own offspring from a human liaison. Enki couldn't directly tell Utnapishtim about the flood. That would violate his oath. So, in a clever bit of semantic maneuvering, he spoke to a wall. He went to Utnapishtim's house and addressed the reed wall, saying, reed wall, pay attention to my words. A great flood is coming that will destroy all life. Build a boat, a submersible vessel with these precise dimensions, and so on, giving detailed instructions while Utnapishtim listened from the other side of the wall.
Was this a technicality? Absolutely. Was it exactly the kind of creative problem-solving Enki was known for? Also absolutely. The instructions were specific and intriguing. This wasn't supposed to be a simple boat. The dimensions and design described in the ancient texts suggest something more like a submersible, capable of riding out violent seas and even going underwater if necessary. Some interpretations suggest Enki might have provided technical assistance or materials that humans of that era wouldn't normally have access to. Utnapishtim built the vessel, which must have been a massive undertaking that drew attention and likely ridicule from his neighbors. Imagine trying to explain to your community that a flood is coming in a world where most people had never even seen serious flooding, much less a global deluge. He gathered his family, as well as pairs of animals as instructed, both domesticated animals that humans had learned to breed, and wild animals, preserving genetic diversity for the post-flood world. Some texts suggest he also brought aboard craftsmen, scholars, and others with valuable knowledge so that civilization could be rebuilt. And then they waited. When the catastrophe came, it exceeded even the most dire predictions. The Antarctic ice sheet slid into the ocean exactly as predicted, but the resulting tsunami was even larger than calculated. Walls of water hundreds of feet high raced across the oceans at tremendous speed. Coastal cities were obliterated in minutes. The Mesopotamian plain, where so much of both human and Anunnaki civilization was concentrated, was inundated. The waters rose and rose, covering everything but the highest mountains. The Anunnaki retreated to their spacecraft and orbital stations, looking down on the destruction they had chosen not to prevent. The texts describe them watching from space as their cities vanished beneath the flood, as millions of humans died, as thousands of years of civilization was washed away. And here, the texts give us a surprising detail. Many of the Anunnaki wept. Despite Enlil's arguments about necessity and order, despite the decision to let the flood take its course, many Anunnaki were devastated by the loss of life they witnessed, particularly the female Anunnaki, including Ninmah, who mourned the death of the humans they had helped create. Even Enlil, watching the destruction, began to question whether this had been the right decision. The texts suggest he was troubled by what he saw, the finality of it, the complete erasure of so much life and potential. For days, the waters raged, driven by the momentum of that massive tsunami and the subsequent storms and climate chaos it triggered. The earth itself seemed to be drowning. And then, slowly, the waters began to recede. The flood hadn't been permanent, it couldn't be. The water had to go somewhere, and eventually, gravity and geography did their work. The waters drained into the ocean basins, leaving behind a landscape transformed, buried in mud and silt, but recognizable. When it was safe, the Anunnaki descended back to Earth to assess the damage and begin the process of rebuilding their settlements. And that's when Enlil made a shocking discovery. When the Ark finally came to rest on the mountain, identified in various texts as Mount Nisir or Mount Ararat, Utnapishtim opened the door and looked out on a world transformed. The waters were receding, but the landscape was buried in mud. Everything he had known was gone. He sent out birds to test whether there was dry land, first a dove, then a swallow, then a raven. When the raven didn't return, he knew it had found land and food. He disembarked with his family and the animals, and the first thing he did was build an altar and make an offering to the gods, including Enki, who had saved him. The Anunnaki, smelling the offering, a detail repeated in multiple versions of this story, came to investigate, and that's when Enlil discovered what Enki had done. The confrontation was explosive. Enlil believed the plan was foolproof. Let nature take its course, eliminate the human problem, start fresh. But here were humans, alive, saved by his brother's intervention. All that death, all that destruction, and for what? Humans survived anyway. The texts describe Enlil as furious at first, ready to punish both Enki and the surviving humans. But something had changed in Enlil during the flood. Watching that much death from orbit, seeing the complete erasure of a civilization had affected him. And now, seeing these surviving humans making offerings, showing gratitude, demonstrating the very qualities that made them more than just workers, he made a different choice. Instead of punishment, Enlil made a covenant. Humans would be allowed to survive and rebuild. The Anunnaki would help humanity recover and would teach humanity the arts of civilization, agriculture, architecture, writing, mathematics, and astronomy. But there would be limits. Humans would be mortal, their lifespans reduced from the centuries-long lives of antediluvian humans to the decades-long lives we know today. They would never again threaten to rival the Anunnaki in power or population. This moment represents a fundamental shift in the relationship between Anunnaki and humans. Before the flood, humans were primarily servants or curiosities. After the flood, there was a recognition of humanity's persistence, resilience, and right to exist, albeit still under Anunnaki oversight. King Anu himself, communicating from Nibiru, endorsed this new arrangement. The human experiment would continue, but in a different form. In the aftermath of the flood, the world was like a blank canvas covered in mud. The great cities were buried, the infrastructure destroyed, the accumulated knowledge nearly lost. But unlike previous extinction events in Earth's history, this recovery would be different. This time, survivors had help. The Anunnaki, particularly Enki and his faction, took an active role in helping humanity rebuild. This wasn't pure altruism. They still needed the gold mining to continue, and that required human labor. But there was also a genuine sense of responsibility, especially from the Anunnaki who had opposed letting the flood destroy humanity in the first place. The texts describe how the Anunnaki gave humanity the Me, a Sumerian term that's difficult to translate, but roughly means the fundamental principles of civilization. These weren't just abstract concepts, but practical knowledge and even physical tools or devices that encoded this knowledge. Agriculture was the first priority. Humans had practiced basic farming before the flood, but now the Anunnaki introduced advanced techniques. Irrigation systems, crop rotation, selective breeding of plants and animals, and the development of high-yield grain varieties.
The texts specifically credit Enlil with teaching grain cultivation and Enki with teaching humans about water management and fishing. The region we call Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, became the primary focus of this rebuilding effort. The geography was ideal: fertile soil, replenished by annual floods, access to water, and a relatively moderate climate. But it required sophisticated water management to reach its full potential. The Anunnaki directed the construction of canal systems, irrigation networks, and water storage facilities. These weren't primitive ditches, but sophisticated engineering projects that rival modern capabilities. Some of these ancient canals and water management systems remain visible in satellite imagery today. Their geometric precision suggests advanced planning and construction techniques.
Around 10,000 to 8,000 BCE, permanent settlements began to appear in Mesopotamia. These weren't random collections of mud huts, but planned cities with distinct districts, central temples, administrative buildings, and organized streets. The speed and sophistication of this urban development has long puzzled archaeologists. Why did complex cities emerge so suddenly in this region? The Anunnaki texts provide an answer. These cities were built according to Anunnaki designs, in some cases directly atop the ruins of pre-flood Anunnaki settlements. Eridu was rebuilt first, Enki's city, the oldest continuously sacred site in Mesopotamia. Archaeological evidence shows Eridu had at least 16 levels of occupation, with the deepest levels containing sophisticated architecture that predates the culture that supposedly built it. Nippur was re-established as Enlil's administrative center. This city held special importance. It was considered the religious capital, where kingship itself descended from heaven. No king of Mesopotamia was considered legitimate unless recognized at Nippur's temple. Other cities followed, each associated with a particular Anunnaki patron. Ur, the city of Nana/Sin, associated with the moon. Uruk, eventually presided over by Inanna, would become one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. Lagash, Umma, Kish, each with its own patron deity and role in the emerging civilization. But these cities weren't just administrative centers or gold processing facilities. They were cultural and religious centers where humans and Anunnaki interacted daily. At the heart of each city stood a ziggurat, a massive stepped pyramid that served multiple purposes. The ziggurats were architectural marvels, rising hundreds of feet into the sky with precise geometric construction. At their summit sat temples where the Anunnaki gods resided when they visited their cities. But these structures also had practical functions. They served as landing platforms for Anunnaki aircraft, as astronomical observatories, as communication centers, and as symbols of the connection between heaven and earth. Archaeological excavations have revealed the sophistication of these ancient cities. They had running water systems, sewage management, paved streets, multi-story buildings, and public spaces. The level of urban planning suggests centralized authority with access to advanced architectural and engineering knowledge. The question that haunts archaeologists is, how did a species that was supposedly still emerging from the Stone Age suddenly develop such sophisticated civilization? The Anunnaki texts provide a straightforward answer. They had help and guidance from beings who had been building cities for thousands of years on another world. Among all the gifts the Anunnaki gave to humanity, perhaps none was more transformative than writing. The development of written language is typically presented as a gradual evolution from simple pictographs to complex cuneiform, but the Sumerian evidence suggests something different. Writing appeared suddenly, fully formed, and remarkably sophisticated. Sumerian cuneiform wasn't a primitive system. From its earliest examples around 3400 BCE, it was capable of expressing complex ideas, keeping detailed records, recording poetry and mythology, and documenting legal and commercial transactions. This isn't what we'd expect from a writing system in its infancy. The texts credit Nabu or Nisaba in earlier traditions with teaching humans the art of writing. This wasn't just forming letters, it was the entire concept of encoding spoken language into permanent symbols, organizing information, creating literature, and maintaining records across generations. Why did the Anunnaki teach humans to write? Several practical reasons emerge from the texts. First, record-keeping for the mining operations and agricultural production required precise documentation. Second, administrative control over growing human populations required written laws and decrees. Third, preserving Anunnaki knowledge and history required a medium that could outlast oral tradition. But there may have been a deeper reason. Enki, ever the teacher and supporter of human advancement, saw writing as a way to elevate humanity. Written language allows knowledge to accumulate across generations, for ideas to be preserved and built upon, for civilization to progress. It was, in a sense, another form of forbidden knowledge, another step toward human independence. The Sumerian king list, one of the most intriguing ancient documents, was written in this cuneiform script. It lists the kings who ruled before and after the flood, with the pre-flood kings having impossibly long reigns, tens of thousands of years in some cases. Conventional scholarship dismisses these as mythological exaggerations, but if these kings were actually Anunnaki with lifespans far exceeding human norms, the numbers become more understandable. Ancient Mesopotamian tradition speaks of the Apkallu, 7 wise beings who came before the flood and taught humanity the arts of civilization. These weren't human sages, but supernatural beings, often depicted as fishmen or humans with bird features, who served as advisors to the first kings and teachers to humanity. The Apkallu taught temple construction and religious rites, mathematics and geometry, astronomy and calendar keeping, medicine and healing arts, agriculture and animal husbandry, metalworking and craftsmanship, music and the arts. These descriptions align perfectly with the Anunnaki narrative. The Apkallu were likely Anunnaki or human Anunnaki hybrids who served as intermediaries between the divine and human realms, translating advanced knowledge into forms that developing human civilization could understand and implement. One of the most famous Apkallu was Adapa, described as the son of Enki, whether literally or figuratively is debated. Adapa was said to be the wisest of men who broke the wings of the south wind and was summoned to heaven to answer for his actions. The story describes him being offered the bread and water of immortality, but refusing them on Enki's advice, thus remaining mortal but preserving his wisdom for humanity. These teacher beings appeared throughout human history during crucial developmental periods, always at the right moment to provide the knowledge humans needed to take the next step in their civilization's evolution. Were they following a plan? Was there a deliberate program to gradually elevate humanity to a certain level of capability while maintaining Anunnaki oversight? The Sumerians had a concept that's central to understanding Anunnaki influence on human governance: Nam Lugal, which translates to kingship. According to their tradition, kingship was not a human invention, but a divine institution that descended from heaven to earth. The first human kings were not merely elected leaders or successful warlords. They were chosen by the Anunnaki, given authority by the gods, and often trained in the temples. These early kings served as intermediaries between the divine and human realms, implementing Anunnaki policies while administering human affairs.
The ideal of divine kingship would persist for thousands of years across many cultures. The Egyptian pharaoh as god-king, the Chinese emperor as son of heaven, the Japanese emperor descended from the sun goddess. All of these share a common thread: rulers claiming legitimacy through divine descent or divine appointment. But in Mesopotamia, this wasn't mythology, it was living reality. The king literally received his crown and authority from the Anunnaki patron of his city. He consulted with the gods, or their priests who had direct contact, on major decisions. He was expected to maintain the temples, ensure the performance of rituals, and keep the relationship between humans and gods harmonious. This system had advantages and disadvantages. On the positive side, it created stable governance, continuity of culture, and a sense of cosmic order. On the negative side, it locked humans into a subordinate role, with ultimate authority always residing with beings who were not part of the human community. Some kings chafed at these limitations. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest written stories in human history, is partly about a king's quest to transcend human limitations and challenge the divine order. Gilgamesh, who was 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, another Nephilim, sought immortality and ultimately failed, a story that can be read as a warning about accepting one's place in the cosmic hierarchy. We've discussed how the Anunnaki came to Earth for gold and how they created humans to mine it. But as the centuries passed, the gold mining operation became more complex, and the relationship between Anunnaki and humans evolved beyond simple master-servant dynamics. The gold was still being extracted, processed, and periodically shipped to Nibiru when the planet's orbit brought it close enough to Earth. But the logistics of this operation revealed something interesting. The Anunnaki were here for a long time, far longer than a simple mining expedition would require. If gold was the only objective, the mission should have been completed relatively quickly by the standards of an advanced civilization. Extract sufficient gold, repair Nibiru's atmosphere, and return home. But instead, the Anunnaki stayed for hundreds of thousands of years, building increasingly complex civilizations, becoming emotionally and genetically entangled with humanity, and investing tremendous resources in human development. Why? Several theories emerge from careful analysis of the texts. Theory 1, Earth as colony. Nibiru's orbit meant that its inhabitants could only survive on their home world for limited periods. Earth became a refuge, a second home where Anunnaki could live comfortably for extended periods. Some Anunnaki preferred Earth to Nibiru and wanted to establish a permanent presence here. Theory 2, political exile. Some texts suggest that factional disputes on Nibiru led to certain groups being sent to Earth not just as workers, but as exiles. Earth became a place where ambitious Anunnaki could build their own power bases away from the strict hierarchies of their home world. Theory 3, the human experiment. Perhaps the most intriguing possibility is that humanity itself became more important than the gold. Creating an intelligent species, watching it evolve and develop civilization became a source of fascination and pride, particularly for Enki and his faction. Humans were no longer just tools, but a legacy, a new species that carried Anunnaki genetics into the future. Theory 4, Earth's resources. Gold wasn't the only valuable resource on Earth. The planet had abundant water, diverse biology, and strategic location. Some interpretations suggest Earth was being terraformed or developed for long-term Anunnaki use, with humans serving as caretakers and developers. Whatever the full truth, it's clear that the Anunnaki mission evolved far beyond its original parameters. They weren't just visiting Earth, they were transforming it and being transformed by it in return. One of the most human aspects of the Anunnaki story is how it's driven by family dynamics, rivalries, and personal relationships that echo the complexity of any human family, just played out on a cosmic scale with the fate of civilizations hanging in the balance. At the center was the ongoing tension between Enlil and Enki. These half-brothers represented opposing philosophies about humanity and Earth itself. Enlil believed in order, hierarchy, and the primacy of the mission. Humans were useful but ultimately temporary, tools to accomplish a task. Earth was a resource to be exploited. When problems arose, his solutions tended towards control, punishment, and, if necessary, elimination. He was the stern father, the authoritarian ruler, the guardian of tradition. Enki believed in growth, adaptation, and potential. Humans were children to be nurtured, educated, and eventually elevated. Earth was a treasure to be cherished. When problems arose, his solutions involved creativity, compromise, and education. He was the permissive father, the innovative thinker, the breaker of rules for what he saw as higher purposes. Neither was entirely right or entirely wrong, and both had legitimate concerns. Enlil's worries about losing control, about humans becoming too powerful, about the contamination of Anunnaki bloodlines, these weren't baseless paranoia, but real risks. Enki's optimism about human potential was vindicated by human achievements, but his tendency to give humans knowledge before they were ready to handle it responsibly caused real problems. Their sister, Ninmah, or Ninhursag, often tried to mediate between them. As the medical officer who had helped create humanity, she had a maternal connection to humans, but also understood the practical concerns that Enlil raised. Her role as peacemaker became increasingly difficult as the brothers' conflict intensified. If Enlil and Enki were the old guard, representing the original mission and its complications, their granddaughter, Inanna, represented something new and potentially dangerous, a younger generation of Anunnaki born on Earth who saw Earth as home rather than as a colonial outpost. Inanna, called Ishtar by the Akkadians and later peoples, is one of the most complex and controversial figures in ancient mythology. She was associated with love and sexuality, but also with war and political power. She was beautiful but ruthless, generous but vengeful, creative but destructive. She loved humanity but used humans as pawns in her political games. The texts describe Inanna as ambitious and status-obsessed. She demanded and received worship from multiple cities, accumulated divine powers and responsibilities from other Anunnaki, and involved in human politics more directly than most of her elders thought appropriate. Her most famous myth, the descent to the underworld, can be read as a power play against her sister Ereshkigal, who ruled the realm of the dead. Inanna's attempt to expand her authority into that realm nearly resulted in her permanent death, saved only by Enki's intervention. But Inanna's relationship with humanity was genuinely affectionate at times. She took human lovers, elevated human kings, and inspired tremendous devotion. Her cult became one of the most popular in the ancient world, lasting for thousands of years across multiple civilizations. She also represents the changing role of female Anunnaki. While early texts emphasize male Anunnaki in leadership roles, Inanna demanded and received power equal to or exceeding many of her male relatives. She commanded armies, influenced succession disputes, and shaped the political landscape of the ancient Near East. One of the most emotionally resonant stories in Anunnaki mythology is the tale of Dumuzi, Inanna's lover. Dumuzi was described as a shepherd king, possibly fully human or perhaps a Nephilim hybrid. He and Inanna had a passionate relationship that seemed to promise a true partnership between divine and human. But when Inanna descended to the underworld and needed someone to take her place there temporarily, Dumuzi was chosen, or according to some versions, Inanna herself chose him in a moment of anger or betrayal. Dumuzi's death and periodic returns from the underworld became the basis for one of the ancient world's most important religious concepts, the dying and resurrecting God. This motif, a divine figure who dies and returns, whose death brings winter or drought, and whose return brings spring and fertility, appears across countless cultures. Osiris in Egypt, Adonis in Greece, Attis in Phrygia, and eventually transformed into Christian resurrection theology. Why was this myth so powerful and persistent? Perhaps because it encoded a deeper truth about the Anunnaki-human relationship. The Anunnaki were not truly immortal. They aged slowly, could be killed, and periodically had to return to Nibiru or enter suspended animation for long periods.
To humans who worshipped them as gods, these absences and returns would have seemed like death and resurrection. The Dumuzi story also highlights the tragedy of human-Anunnaki relationships. The power imbalance was too great. Even when genuine love existed, the difference in lifespan, power, and nature meant these relationships often ended badly. Dumuzi loved a goddess and died for it, a cautionary tale that resonated through the ages. The peace among the Anunnaki was always fragile, maintained by respect for hierarchy and carefully negotiated territorial divisions. But as the Earth mission stretched into its second and third 100,000 years, with new generations born on Earth who had never seen Nibiru, old agreements began to break down. The catalyst was a dispute over control of the spaceport, the primary facility for spacecraft landing and takeoff, located in what is now the Sinai Peninsula. This facility was neutral ground, administered by Utu Shamash under the authority of Enlil, and its control was crucial to all Anunnaki operations on Earth. But Inanna and her faction believed they were being excluded from decision-making, despite their growing power among human populations. They wanted more influence over space operations, more authority over the mission's direction, more recognition from the old guard. The texts describe a conflict that escalated from political maneuvering to outright warfare. Anunnaki factions marshaled their human followers into armies, turning human cities into military assets in their cosmic chess game. This was the first time humans were used as soldiers in Anunnaki conflicts on a large scale. Previously, disputes had been settled through negotiation, political pressure, or limited Anunnaki versus Anunnaki confrontations. But now, humans were numerous enough and loyal enough to their patron gods to serve as proxy armies. The conflict spread across Mesopotamia and into Egypt, where another Anunnaki faction, led by Marduk, Enki's son, was establishing its own power base. The Great Pyramid at Giza, according to some interpretations of the texts, wasn't primarily a tomb, but a functional structure serving as a beacon for spacecraft navigation and possibly as a power generation facility. Control of Egypt meant access to Africa, both the gold mines and the spaceport in Sinai. Marduk's growing power there threatened the careful balance of power that had maintained peace for thousands of years. The Pyramid Wars escalated to a point that horrified even the combatants. The texts describe weapons of tremendous destructive power being deployed, weapons that sound disturbingly similar to modern nuclear technology. Ancient Sumerian texts speak of weapons of terror that could level entire mountains, turn cities to dust, and leave the land poisoned for generations. The Mahabharata, the ancient Indian epic, contains similar descriptions of weapons that produced brilliant light, tremendous heat, and lingering sickness among survivors. In the Sinai Peninsula today, there are areas of fused glass and rock formations that some researchers argue could only have been created by extreme heat, the kind of heat produced by nuclear weapons or similarly advanced technology.
The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, destroyed by fire from heaven, are described in ways that sound like nuclear or thermonuclear explosions. Whether these weapons were actually nuclear in nature or some other advanced technology is debated, but the texts are clear that they were catastrophically destructive and that their use horrified even those who deployed them. The conflict reached its climax when Enlil and the Anunnaki Council authorized the use of these weapons to destroy the spaceport, rather than let it fall into enemy hands. The resulting destruction created what we now call the Dead Sea, a body of water so saline that almost nothing can live in it, surrounded by evidence of extreme heat and devastation. But the weapon's effects spread beyond the intended target. The prevailing winds carried radioactive fallout, or whatever the toxic byproduct was, across Mesopotamia. Cities were abandoned as their populations fell ill with mysterious diseases. The agricultural land that had sustained civilization became contaminated. This catastrophe, dated to around 2024 BCE, based on archaeological evidence of widespread destruction in that period, marked the beginning of the end of direct Anunnaki rule over humanity.
In the chaos following the weapon's deployment, one Anunnaki emerged more powerful than before: Marduk, the firstborn son of Enki. Marduk had always been ambitious, feeling that his birth order should grant him authority over Enlil's children in the succession hierarchy. The war and its aftermath gave him an opportunity. Marduk had spent centuries building his power base in Egypt, where he was known as Ra. He had his own human followers, his own infrastructure, his own vision for how Earth should be governed. And unlike the old guard, who still thought of Earth as a temporary colonial outpost, Marduk saw Earth as home. As the Mesopotamian region struggled to recover from the catastrophe, Marduk moved his followers into Babylon. He transformed this relatively minor city into the new power center of Mesopotamia. The Babylonians wrote new creation myths positioning Marduk as the supreme god, superior even to Anu, Enlil, and Enki. The famous Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, describes Marduk defeating the chaos monster Tiamat and creating the world from her body. This is often interpreted as political propaganda, rewriting history to legitimize Marduk's claim to supreme authority by casting him as the creator god. The Genesis story from Genesis can be understood in this context. According to the Sumerian versions, humans in Babylon, under Marduk's direction, attempted to build a massive structure, a new spaceport or communications facility that would allow Babylon to contact Nibiru directly, bypassing Enlil's authority. Enlil's response was dramatic. He confused the languages of humanity. This might not have been literal linguistic confusion, but rather the deliberate dispersion of human populations to prevent them from concentrating enough power to challenge divine authority. Break up the population, scatter them across different regions with limited communication, and no single human city could become powerful enough to challenge divine authority. After the catastrophic war and Marduk's consolidation of power, the Anunnaki presence on Earth began to change. It wasn't a sudden departure, but a gradual withdrawal from direct involvement in human affairs. Several factors drove this transition. Physical withdrawal. As Nibiru moved away from Earth in its orbit, travel between the planets became more difficult. The Anunnaki who remained on Earth had to be prepared to stay for thousands of years until the next close approach. Many chose to return home while they could. Generational shift.
The Anunnaki who had originally come to Earth, Anu, Enlil, and Enki and their generation, were ready to rest after hundreds of thousands of years. Even with their extended lifespans, they were ancient. The younger generation, like Marduk and Inanna, had different attitudes and priorities. They had been born on Earth, or had lived there so long that Nibiru was mythology to them. Human independence. Humans had learned well, perhaps too well. They could maintain the agricultural systems, run the cities, mine and process metals, and even conduct warfare. They still needed guidance on complex matters, but they no longer required constant supervision for daily operations. Philosophical evolution. The Anunnaki themselves were divided on the question of humans' future. Should humans remain subservient, or should they be allowed to develop independently? The war had shown that trying to maintain absolute control had costs, costs some Anunnaki were no longer willing to pay. Mission completion. Had the original mission been accomplished? Had the original mission been accomplished? Nibiru's atmosphere had presumably been stabilized. The urgent need for massive gold extraction was reduced. What exactly was the purpose of maintaining the Earth colony now? The withdrawal wasn't uniform. Some Anunnaki remained, particularly those who had fallen in love with Earth and humanity. Others departed but promised to return. Still others entered states of suspended animation in secret facilities, waiting to awaken in a future time. As direct Anunnaki presence decreased, a new institution grew in importance, the priesthood. These were humans who served as intermediaries between the gods and the people, maintaining the temples, performing rituals, and preserving secret knowledge. But the priesthood was more than just a religious institution. It was a repository of Anunnaki knowledge, a communication network, and a governance system. The high priests knew secrets that ordinary humans didn't, secrets about astronomy, mathematics, medicine, agriculture, and the true nature of the gods. Some priests were Nephilim or descendants of Nephilim, carrying Anunnaki genetics that gave them abilities or insights beyond normal humans. Others were simply exceptional humans chosen and trained by the Anunnaki to be their representatives on Earth. The temples became centers of learning as well as worship. They housed libraries, observatories, and schools where scribes learned the complex cuneiform writing system and studied ancient texts. The priests monitored the movements of celestial bodies, particularly watching for the return of Nibiru, the home of the gods. Mystery schools emerged, claiming to preserve secret teachings from the gods. These schools, whether in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, or later traditions, all claimed to possess hidden knowledge that could elevate the initiated to a higher state of understanding. How much of this hidden knowledge was real, and how much was myth or misunderstanding accumulated over generations? It's impossible to say with certainty, but the consistency of certain symbols, concepts, and practices across disparate cultures suggests some core of genuine ancient knowledge being preserved and transmitted.
As the Anunnaki withdrew, they left behind monuments, massive stone structures that encoded their knowledge and announced their presence to future generations. These weren't just buildings, but messages in architecture. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the most famous example. Its construction remains an engineering mystery. The precision of its construction, aligned to true north within fractions of a degree, built with millions of massive stone blocks cut and placed with extraordinary accuracy, suggests either advanced technology or knowledge far beyond what we typically attribute to Bronze Age civilization. The pyramid encodes mathematical constants like pi and phi in its dimensions. Its shaft alignments point to specific stars and constellations. Its interior chambers and passages suggest purposes beyond simple tomb architecture. Was it a monument, a power plant, a beacon, a vault for preserving knowledge? Perhaps all of these. Similar megalithic structures appear worldwide. Stonehenge in England, the massive stones of Baalbek in Lebanon, the precisely cut polygonal walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, the mysterious stone spheres of Costa Rica, the underwater structures off the coast of Japan. These structures share common features: massive stones moved over great distances, precision cutting and placement that challenge modern capabilities, astronomical alignments, and construction dates that push back earlier and earlier as new evidence emerges. The mainstream explanation is human ingenuity and determination, and humans are certainly capable of remarkable achievements. But the Anunnaki texts offer an alternative. These monuments were built with Anunnaki assistance or supervision, using advanced technology, and were intended to last through future catastrophes as proof that advanced civilization once existed and as markers for the gods' eventual return. As we enter the final hour of our journey, we're moving into a period that bridges mythology and recorded history, a time when the Anunnaki presence was fading, but their influence remained overwhelming in human consciousness. From approximately 3000 BCE to 1000 BCE, we see a fascinating transition. The ancient texts become less about direct divine intervention and more about kings consulting with gods, priests interpreting divine will, and humans managing their own affairs under the distant oversight of increasingly absent deities. The Sumerian king list tells us that after kingship descended from heaven, various cities rose and fell in prominence. Each city claimed the favor of its patron deity, but the gods were less present, less directly involved. Kings still claimed divine right and divine ancestry, but the gods communicated through dreams, omens, and priestly interpretation rather than direct conversation. This was the age of legendary kings like Sargon of Akkad, who around 2300 BCE created the world's first empire, uniting the competing city-states of Mesopotamia under one rule. Sargon's own origin story, found as an infant in a basket floating on the river, raised by a gardener, chosen by the goddess Inanna, mirrors patterns we see repeated in later traditions, from Moses to Romulus. Was Sargon another Nephilim, carrying Anunnaki bloodlines that gave him the charisma and ability to achieve what no fully human leader had done before? The texts hint at this, describing him as having unusual favor with the gods and abilities beyond normal men.
His grandson, Naram-Sin, went even further, declaring himself an actual god, not just chosen by the gods, but divine in his own right. He wore the horned crown that had been the exclusive symbol of the Anunnaki. This arrogance, claiming equality with the gods, was punished according to the texts. His empire collapsed under invasion, and later tradition remembered him as an example of hubris. The pattern repeats throughout history. Exceptional humans who might carry Anunnaki genetics or who claim divine mandate rise to power, build empires, and then fall when they either lose divine favor or overstep the boundaries between human and divine authority. By 1800 BCE, Babylon had become the dominant power in Mesopotamia under the rule of Hammurabi. This wasn't just a political shift, it was a theological revolution.
Marduk, who had spent thousands of years building his power base, now achieved recognition as the supreme god of the region. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest and most complete legal codes, begins with Hammurabi declaring that the gods, particularly Marduk, have chosen him to rule and bring justice to the land. The stele showing Hammurabi receiving the law from a seated divine figure is a visual representation of how kingship and law derived their authority from the gods. But look closely at what's happening here. This is codified law, written down, publicly displayed, applying equally to all citizens, at least in theory. This represents a shift from arbitrary divine decree to systematic jurisprudence. Yes, the authority still comes from the gods, but the system itself is becoming more human, more institutional, less dependent on direct divine intervention. Babylon's famous Hanging Gardens, built centuries later under Nebuchadnezzar II, were considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The Ishtar Gate, with its brilliant blue-glazed bricks and decorations of dragons and bulls, still impresses modern viewers. The city's ziggurats, libraries, and astronomical observatories made it a center of learning that would influence Greek philosophy and science. But by this time, 600 BCE, the Anunnaki themselves were largely absent from direct human interaction. Marduk, if he remained on Earth at all, ruled through established institutions rather than personal presence. The age of the gods walking among men was ending, or had already ended. While Mesopotamia developed under Enlil's faction and later Marduk's rule, Egypt evolved under different Anunnaki influence. The Egyptian pantheon, Ra, Osiris, Isis, Horus, Set, and others, maps onto the Anunnaki family tree with remarkable consistency. Ra was Marduk, who established his power base in Egypt before moving to Babylon. Enki was known as Ptah, the creator god and master craftsman. Osiris was Asar, possibly another of Enki's sons, who taught agriculture and civilization to the Egyptians. His wife, Isis, Aset, was Ninmah, Ninhursag. Their son, Horus, was the rightful king, opposed by Set, Enlil, or one of his faction, creating a conflict that mirrors the Enlil-Enki rivalry. The Egyptian obsession with immortality, resurrection, and the afterlife makes more sense in this context. The Egyptians weren't inventing these concepts, they were trying to replicate what they had observed in their gods. The Anunnaki lived for thousands of years, could revive each other from death-like states using advanced technology, and promised their favored humans a similar immortality in the afterlife. The Great Pyramid, as we discussed earlier, wasn't built by slaves with copper tools and wooden rollers, or if it was, we must reconsider what ancient Egyptians were capable of. The precision, scale, and sophistication suggest either advanced technology or advanced knowledge that has been lost. The Sphinx, with erosion patterns suggesting it might be far older than conventional dating allows, gazes eastward, watching for what? Some researchers suggest it was oriented to watch for the return of the gods, to give warning when Nibiru's approach brought the Anunnaki back to Earth. The Anunnaki influence wasn't limited to Mesopotamia and Egypt. As human populations spread and civilizations developed across the globe, we see similar patterns, similar myths, similar claims of divine teaching. In Greece, the Titans and Olympian gods mirror the Anunnaki hierarchy. Zeus, equivalent to Enlil, overthrowing Kronos, equivalent to Anu, perhaps, to rule the gods. Prometheus bringing fire and knowledge to humanity against the gods' wishes, echoing Enki's role. The Olympians taking human lovers and producing demigod heroes like Hercules and Perseus, like the Nephilim. The Greeks acknowledged that their gods came from the east, from Mesopotamia, from Egypt, from Phoenicia. They weren't creating new myths, but adapting and localizing older traditions. The oracle at Delphi, the mysteries of Eleusis, the mathematical discoveries of Pythagoras all claimed roots in ancient wisdom received from divine or semi-divine teachers. In India, the Vedic texts describe the Devas and Asuras, two factions of powerful beings who warred with each other, very much like the Anunnaki factions. The Mahabharata describes flying vehicles, vimanas, devastating weapons that sound nuclear in their effects, and cities in the sky. The gods take human form, interbreed with humans, and interfere constantly in human affairs. The ancient Indian understanding of vast cycles of time, yugas lasting hundreds of thousands of years, aligns more closely with the Anunnaki timeline than with the traditional biblical chronology of a few thousand years. The Hindu concept of avatars, gods descending to earth in physical form during times of crisis, perfectly describes the Anunnaki pattern of intervention. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, was described as a tall, bearded, light-skinned teacher who came from across the sea, taught civilization to the people, and promised to return. The Aztec and Mayan calendars tracked vast cycles of time with sophisticated astronomical knowledge. Their pyramids, like those in Egypt, aligned with celestial bodies and encoded mathematical constants.
In China, the legendary Yellow Emperor and other divine ancestors were said to have descended from heaven, taught civilization, and established the mandate of heaven that legitimized imperial rule for thousands of years. Dragons, often depicted as serpent-like beings associated with wisdom and power, held similar symbolic importance to the serpent symbolism in Middle Eastern traditions. The pattern is global and consistent. Ancient civilizations worldwide claim that their fundamental knowledge came from divine teachers who descended from the sky, established civilization, and then departed with promises to return. As direct Anunnaki presence faded, a new type of intermediary emerged, the prophet. These individuals claimed to receive messages directly from the gods, not through priestly rituals or institutional channels, but through personal visions, dreams, or direct encounters. The Hebrew Bible is filled with such prophets. Abraham received direct communication from the Lord, possibly Enlil, called El in early Hebrew tradition. Moses encountered divine beings on Mount Sinai and received detailed instructions for building the tabernacle, instructions that include precise architectural specifications that some researchers suggest describe advanced technology rather than mere religious symbols. The Ark of the Covenant, in particular, has attracted tremendous speculation. The detailed construction instructions, specific metals, precise dimensions, careful insulation between conductive and non-conductive materials sound more like technical specifications for an electrical device than religious artifact design. Stories of people being struck dead for touching it incorrectly reinforce this interpretation. Was it a communication device? A power source? A weapon? The prophets consistently delivered messages about maintaining proper worship, avoiding false gods, other Anunnaki factions, and preparing for future divine intervention. They spoke of a day when the gods would return, judge humanity, and establish a new order. This expectation of return became central to Jewish, Christian, and Islamic eschatology. Ezekiel's vision deserves special attention. This prophet describes encountering what he calls the glory of the Lord, but his description is remarkably specific and mechanical. Wheels within wheels, fire and metal, flying beings with multiple faces, tremendous noise. Read without theological interpretation, it sounds very much like someone describing advanced spacecraft and their occupants, beings who appeared overwhelmingly powerful to someone with no context for such technology. By around 1000 BCE, the age of direct divine intervention had essentially ended in most cultures. The gods no longer walked among humans. Kings no longer met face to face with deities. Prophets might receive visions or messages, but direct encounters became rare and then ceased entirely. What happened? Where did the Anunnaki go? Several possibilities emerge from the texts and from logical analysis. Scenario 1. Return to Nibiru. The most straightforward explanation is that most Anunnaki returned to their homeworld as it completed its swing through the inner solar system and headed back to the outer reaches. The journey home was possible only during limited windows when the planet was close enough. Those who missed these windows would be stranded on Earth for another 3,600 years. Scenario 2. Suspended animation. Some texts suggest certain Anunnaki entered states of deep sleep or suspended animation, waiting in hidden facilities for the right time to reawaken. This would conserve resources, avoid the boredom of millennia of waiting, and preserve them until Nibiru's return or until humanity reached a certain level of development. Scenario 3. Voluntary exile. By choosing to remain on Earth permanently, some Anunnaki might have severed their ties with Nibiru and their former society. They would live among humans, possibly disguising their nature, influencing events from behind the scenes rather than through direct rule. Scenario 4. The mixing. Perhaps some Anunnaki simply merged with humanity through continued interbreeding. Each generation would dilute the Anunnaki genetics until their descendants were essentially human, though carrying latent traits that might occasionally express in unusual abilities, longevity, or intelligence. Scenario 5. Interdimensional shift. More speculative interpretations suggest the Anunnaki didn't leave physically, but shifted to a different dimensional frequency or plane of existence, remaining present but invisible and largely unable to interact with physical reality under specific conditions. The darkest possibility is that catastrophe befell the Anunnaki, either on Earth, on Nibiru, or in the space between. Perhaps their civilization fell. Perhaps Nibiru's orbit was altered, throwing off the return schedule. Perhaps they died out or were destroyed by some threat we don't know about. The texts suggest elements of multiple scenarios. Some Anunnaki returned home. Some entered suspended animation. Some remained active but hidden. The result, regardless of specific mechanisms, was the same. Humanity was left to develop on its own, free from direct divine oversight, but carrying the legacy of hundreds of thousands of years of Anunnaki influence. One of the most controversial aspects of the Anunnaki story is the question of bloodlines. If the Anunnaki interbred with humans for hundreds of thousands of years, creating Nephilim and hybrid lineages, did those bloodlines persist? Are there people alive today who carry Anunnaki genetics? This question has been exploited by various groups throughout history to justify claims of racial superiority, divine right to rule, or special status, all of which are ethically and scientifically problematic. But setting aside these misuses, the question itself has merit from a genetic perspective. If Anunnaki human hybrids existed and could reproduce, their genetics would spread through the human population over time. After hundreds of generations, essentially all humans might carry some fraction of Anunnaki DNA, but certain lineages, particularly royal families, priestly castes, and others who practiced endogamy, marrying within the group, might retain higher concentrations. Historical claims of divine bloodlines aren't rare. European monarchies claimed descent from gods, heroes, or biblical figures. Japanese emperors claimed descent from the sun goddess Amaterasu. Egyptian pharaohs claimed to be living gods or descended from Ra. Hindu Brahmin caste claimed descent from divine teachers.
Many indigenous peoples trace ancestry to sky beings or gods. Were these claims metaphorical, establishing legitimacy through mythology, or were they maintaining an actual biological lineage stretching back to Anunnaki human unions? Modern genetics offers tantalizing hints. The discovery of mitochondrial Eve, a woman who lived in Africa roughly 200,000 years ago, from whom all living humans descended through the maternal line, roughly aligns with the Anunnaki timeline for human creation. The discovery of archaic human DNA in modern populations, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and potentially other unknown hominids, shows that human genetics is more complex than previously thought, with multiple species contributing to our genome.
Could there be another contributor we haven't identified? Not another Earth hominid, but an extraterrestrial one. It's a question mainstream science doesn't seriously entertain, but the genetic tools to detect such a signal exist if researchers chose to look for it. Throughout recorded history, secret societies have claimed to preserve ancient knowledge from antediluvian civilizations, from the gods, or from mysterious teachers. The Freemasons, Rosicrucians, Knights Templar, and countless other groups have rituals, symbols, and teachings they claim trace back to ancient wisdom. How much of this is legitimate ancient knowledge, and how much is later invention? It's difficult to say with certainty, but certain patterns suggest some continuity. Architectural knowledge? The Freemasons claimed to preserve the secrets of sacred geometry and temple construction from Solomon's Temple, which itself was supposedly built according to divine instructions. The precision of Gothic cathedrals, the mathematical ratios encoded in their dimensions, and the survival of advanced building techniques through the Dark Ages suggest genuine preservation of ancient architectural knowledge. Astronomical knowledge? Many secret societies incorporate astronomical symbolism and claim to understand celestial cycles hidden from the masses. Given that ancient civilizations did possess sophisticated astronomical knowledge that was partially lost during various civilizational collapses, this claim has merit. Ritual knowledge? The initiation rituals of mystery schools and secret societies often involve death and resurrection symbolism, ascending through degrees of enlightenment and receiving hidden names and words of power. These elements appear in ancient Egyptian, Greek, and Mesopotamian mystery traditions, suggesting continuity from ancient priestly practices. Symbolic language? Certain symbols appear repeatedly across secret societies and trace back to ancient sources. The all-seeing eye, Eye of Horus, Eye of Providence, the pyramid, the compass and square, the Ouroboros, serpent eating its tail, sacred geometry patterns. These aren't random. They encode concepts and knowledge in visual form. The most intriguing possibility is that some secret societies genuinely do preserve fragments of Anunnaki knowledge, passed down through initiatory lines, encoded in symbols and rituals, guarded by oaths of secrecy. Not because the knowledge is inherently dangerous, but because it contradicts the authorized narratives of religion and science, revealing a history humanity has forgotten or been taught to dismiss as myth. The development of monotheism, the belief in a single all-powerful God, represents a significant departure from the polytheistic worldview that dominated ancient civilizations. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all emerged from the same Mesopotamian Levantine cultural sphere where Anunnaki worship had been central for thousands of years. How did cultures that worshipped multiple gods transition to worshiping one? And how does this relate to the Anunnaki story? One interpretation is that monotheism represents a theological evolution, humanity maturing from primitive polytheism to sophisticated monotheism. But another interpretation fits the Anunnaki narrative. Monotheism was a deliberate reframing of history to serve political and social purposes. Consider, the Hebrew name for God is Elohim, a plural word.
"Let us create man in our image" uses plural pronouns. The text describes sons of God taking human wives. These are echoes of the polytheistic reality that predated the monotheistic rewrite. The conflict between Enlil, or El, and Enki, known variously as Ea, later Satan or Lucifer in demonized form, becomes reframed as the struggle between God and the devil. The Nephilim become demons or fallen angels. The Anunnaki Council becomes a single deity. The complexity is simplified, moralized, and packaged for a population that needed clear moral guidance rather than cosmic family drama. This reinterpretation served multiple purposes: unified populations under a single religious authority rather than multiple competing god cults, simplified moral teaching by reducing shades of gray to clear good versus evil, reduced the power of priestly classes who claimed to speak for multiple gods, prepared humanity for eventual independence by replacing multiple external authorities with one abstract universal principle. But the original polytheistic reality keeps breaking through in the texts, creating the theological puzzles and inconsistencies that scholars have debated for centuries. In the modern era, particularly since the mid-20th century, humanity has experienced a phenomenon that might be relevant to the Anunnaki story: widespread reports of unidentified flying objects and encounters with apparently non-human intelligent beings. The connection between ancient alien theories and modern UFO phenomena is obvious but controversial. Are these the same beings? Are the Anunnaki returning, or have they never truly left? Or are these unrelated phenomena that humans connect because we seek patterns and explanations? Consider the parallels. Ancient texts describe flying vehicles, vimanas, divine chariots, Ezekiel's wheels. Modern witnesses report advanced craft with capabilities beyond known technology. Ancient beings described as shining ones, those who from heaven came. Modern witnesses describe humanoid beings, often described as having a luminous quality. Ancient accounts of genetic manipulation and hybrid creation. Modern abduction reports involving medical procedures and genetic sampling. Ancient promises of return and future judgment.
The skeptical explanation is projection. We see what we expect to see. And in an age aware of ancient astronaut theories, people interpret ambiguous experiences through that lens. The believer explanation is that these are genuine encounters with either returning Anunnaki or other extraterrestrial species, and the ancient accounts were accurately describing similar encounters. Government acknowledgement of unidentified aerial phenomena, including the Pentagon's release of videos showing objects with extraordinary capabilities, has moved the conversation from fringe speculation toward mainstream discussion. Whether these phenomena connect to the Anunnaki story remains speculative, but the question itself is no longer quite so easily dismissed. One of the most controversial elements of the Anunnaki story is Nibiru itself. Does this planet exist? If so, where is it? And most importantly, is it returning? Astronomical searches for a large planet in the outer solar system have been ongoing for decades. The discovery of trans-Neptunian objects like Pluto, Eris, Makemake, and others confirmed that our solar system extends far beyond the classical planets. In 2016, Caltech astronomers announced evidence for what they call Planet 9, a large planet 5 to 10 times Earth's mass in the distant outer solar system, detected not through direct observation, but through its gravitational influence on other objects. Is Planet 9 actually Nibiru? The proposed orbit doesn't match Sitchin's 3,600-year description. Planet 9's orbit is estimated at 10,000 to 20,000 years. But gravitational perturbations could alter orbits over hundreds of thousands of years. Or perhaps Nibiru and Planet 9 are different objects, and the solar system harbors more secrets than we've discovered. Predictions of Nibiru's imminent return have repeatedly proven false, often attached to apocalyptic prophecies. These failed predictions have understandably created skepticism. But if Nibiru's orbit is as suggested, and if the last close approach was around 1600 BCE, as some researchers claim, linked to global catastrophes recorded in that period, then the next return wouldn't occur until approximately 2000 CE, roughly now. The absence of visible evidence doesn't necessarily disprove Nibiru's existence. A planet approaching from the south celestial pole would be difficult to observe from northern hemisphere observatories. A dark, cold planet reflecting little light would be challenging to detect even with modern instruments until it came quite close. And if the Anunnaki wanted their homeworld's approach to remain undetected until a certain point, they would have the technology to minimize its visibility. This doesn't mean Nibiru is definitely approaching. It means the question remains genuinely open, neither proven nor disproven. Modern archaeology continues to uncover findings that challenge conventional understanding of ancient civilizations and inadvertently provide support for alternative theories like the Anunnaki narrative. Göbekli Tepe, in Turkey, dated to approximately 9600 BCE, predates agriculture, writing, and supposedly organized religion, yet it's a massive temple complex requiring sophisticated organization, engineering, and symbolic thinking. Who built it? And why? The site was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE, as if preserving it for future discovery. The pillars feature carved reliefs of animals and symbols, including what some interpret as astronomical markers. The Antikythera mechanism, recovered from a shipwreck dated to roughly 100 BCE, is an ancient Greek device of astounding complexity, a mechanical computer predicting astronomical positions and eclipses. Its sophistication suggests a long history of similar technology that has been lost. Where did this knowledge come from? The Baghdad battery, a 2,000-year-old artifact that appears to be an electrical galvanic cell, suggests ancient understanding of electricity. Combined with other evidence of ancient electroplating, it hints at technological knowledge that supposedly didn't exist until the modern era. Precise megalithic construction found worldwide, from the polygonal masonry of Sacsayhuaman to the massive stones of Baalbek, demonstrates capabilities that challenge our understanding of ancient technology. Modern engineers struggle to explain how these stones were quarried, transported, and fitted with such precision using supposedly primitive tools. Ancient maps like the Piri Reis map 1513 show coastlines with impossible accuracy for their time, including Antarctica's coast as it appears without ice, suggesting the maps copied from much older sources, created when Antarctica was ice-free or by aerial observation. Genetic anomalies like the Rh-negative blood type, which lacks the protein found in Rh-positive humans and in primates, has unknown origin. Approximately 15% of the human population carries this trait, with highest concentrations in European populations. Some researchers speculate it represents non-terrestrial genetic contribution. None of these individually prove the Anunnaki story, but collectively they suggest human history is more complex with more advanced knowledge in antiquity than mainstream narratives acknowledge. The Sumerian language presents one of history's great mysteries. It appears fully formed around 3500 BCE with no linguistic ancestors or related languages. It's a language isolate, connected to no other known language family. How does a sophisticated language with complex grammar and extensive vocabulary simply appear? The Anunnaki answer: it doesn't. Sumerian was the language of the gods, taught to humans and adapted for their use. It contains terms and concepts for things that shouldn't exist in a primitive agricultural society. Advanced astronomical knowledge, sophisticated medical procedures including surgery, complex legal and administrative concepts, advanced metallurgy and chemistry, comprehensive astronomical observations requiring centuries of data collection. The sudden appearance of Sumerian civilization at such a high level of sophistication within a few generations, going from scattered agricultural villages to organized city-states with writing, law, architecture, and complex social organization, suggests external input rather than organic development. Modern genetics has revealed that the human genome contains surprisingly little coding DNA. Only about 2% of our DNA actually codes for proteins.
The other 98% was long dismissed as junk DNA, but we now know it has regulatory functions, though much remains mysterious. Some researchers have noted anomalies in human DNA that are difficult to explain through natural selection alone. The relatively recent appearance of modern human genetic markers 100,000 to 200,000 years ago. The genetic bottleneck suggesting all humans descend from a small population. The presence of genetic sequences not found in our closest primate relatives. The rate of human brain development and cognitive abilities relative to other species. Genetic fusion. Human chromosome 2 appears to be a fusion of two separate chromosomes found in great apes.
Could some of these represent signatures of genetic engineering? A deliberately modified species would show exactly these patterns: recent emergence, limited genetic diversity, novel genetic sequences, and enhanced capabilities compared to predecessor species. The Anunnaki texts explicitly describe genetic manipulation, hybridization, and numerous failed attempts before successful human creation. Modern genetics confirms that such manipulation is possible. We do it ourselves now with CRISPR and other gene editing technologies. The question isn't whether genetic engineering is possible, but whether it happened to humanity in our distant past. Anthropologists have long noted universal mythological themes appearing across cultures with no known historical contact. The flood myth, found in virtually every culture worldwide, Sumerian, Hebrew, Greek, Hindu, Chinese, Mayan, Native American, and countless others. While regional floods occur everywhere, explaining local flood myths, the remarkable consistency in details, divine warning, selected survivors, a vessel, animals preserved, and a new covenant between humans and gods suggests either common origin or common experience. The divine teachers. Every civilization claims that divine or semi-divine teachers appeared, taught, and departed. Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, Oannes, Prometheus, the Apkallu, the Vedic rishis, the Chinese Yellow Emperor. The consistency across cultures is striking. The sky gods, deities associated with the sky, stars, and celestial phenomena appear universally. These aren't abstract cosmic principles, but specific beings who descended from heaven, dwelt among humans, and returned to the sky. The dragon symbolism, from Chinese dragons to Mesopotamian serpent gods, from the feathered serpent of Mesoamerica to the Nagas of India, serpent symbolism associated with wisdom, power, and divine knowledge appears globally. The Anunnaki texts associate serpent symbolism with Enki, the creator and teacher of humanity. The axis mundi, the concept of a sacred center, the world tree, the cosmic mountain, the ziggurat, the pillar connecting heaven and earth, appears across all ancient cultures, representing the connection between divine and human realms. Carl Jung explained these universal symbols as arising from the collective unconscious, inherited psychological patterns. But another explanation fits. These aren't psychological archetypes, but historical memories, passed down through all human lineages from a time when these weren't symbols, but realities. Mainstream archaeology operates within established paradigms, and evidence that contradicts these paradigms tends to be dismissed, ignored, or explained away. Yet anomalous findings continue to surface. Out-of-place artifacts, OOPATs, include objects found in geological contexts that predate their supposed invention. Metallic objects in coal seams supposed millions of years old. Precisely machined parts found in stone dated to prehistoric eras, and artistic depictions of seemingly modern objects in ancient contexts. Giant skeletons. Historical newspaper accounts from the 19th and early 20th centuries frequently reported discoveries of human skeletons of extraordinary size, 7 to 12 feet tall, often in ancient burial mounds. These reports were common enough to constitute a pattern, yet the physical evidence has disappeared, and mainstream archaeology dismisses all such claims as hoaxes or misidentification. If the Nephilim were real, hybrids of Anunnaki and humans described as giants, we should expect exactly such findings. Ancient precision. Drill holes in granite showing precision and speed of penetration exceeding modern capabilities with diamond-tipped drills. Perfectly smooth surfaces on diorite and basalt, among the hardest stones, achieved with supposedly primitive copper tools. Massive stones with corners and edges so precise they appear machine-cut. Impossible knowledge. The Antikythera mechanism is one example, but there are others. The battery, complex astronomical instruments, advanced medical tools, sophisticated optics. Each discovery pushes back the timeline of human technological capability and raises questions about knowledge transfer from advanced sources. These anomalies don't fit the gradual linear progression of human development that mainstream archaeology prefers. They suggest a more complex history with advances and retrogressions, lost knowledge and rediscoveries. Exactly what we'd expect if an advanced civilization once existed and then withdrew, leaving humanity to redevelop on its own. In recent decades, a substantial subculture has developed around Anunnaki theories, ancient astronauts, and related concepts. This movement includes academic researchers who challenge mainstream historical and archaeological interpretations, often at professional cost. They meticulously document anomalies, alternative readings of ancient texts, and evidence mainstream scholarship ignores. Spiritual seekers who interpret the Anunnaki story through New Age frameworks, seeing it as explaining human spiritual evolution, the origin of consciousness, and the purpose of human existence. They often blend Anunnaki concepts with channeling, meditation practices, and other spiritual technologies. Conspiracy theorists who believe the Anunnaki story has been deliberately suppressed by governments, religious institutions, or elite bloodlines who benefit from keeping humanity ignorant of its true origins. They see evidence of ongoing Anunnaki or extraterrestrial influence in global events and power structures. The truth, as always, likely lies in nuance. The Anunnaki interpretation certainly has problems, translation challenges, logical gaps, speculative leaps. But mainstream narratives also have significant problems, unexplained anomalies, dogmatic resistance to evidence, and inability to adequately explain the sudden emergence of sophisticated civilization. Rather than choosing sides in tribal fashion, the most productive approach examines all evidence with both openness and critical thinking, acknowledging what we know, what we don't know, and what remains genuinely mysterious. As we near the end of our 5-hour journey through the Anunnaki story, we must ask, what does this narrative mean for humanity today? Whether you interpret it as literal history, as mythology encoding deeper truths, or as an interesting thought experiment, the story carries messages worth considering. We are not alone. The core message is that humanity is not the pinnacle of intelligence in the universe. We were created or influenced by beings more advanced than ourselves. This perspective creates humility. We're part of a larger cosmic community, not isolated masters of a unique Earth. We have purpose. The Anunnaki created humanity for a purpose, initially as workers, but the story evolved. Enki's intervention gave us consciousness, free will, and potential beyond our original design. We're not cosmic accidents, but deliberate creations with capabilities that even our creators didn't fully anticipate. Knowledge is power,
and responsibility. The recurring theme of forbidden knowledge, Enki teaching humans, the tree of knowledge, Prometheus bringing fire, suggests that advancing awareness comes with divine displeasure, but ultimately elevates us. Yet it also carries responsibility. Knowledge without wisdom leads to catastrophe, as the ancient weapons and conflicts demonstrate.
The conflict between Enlil, authority, obedience, and order, and Enki, freedom, knowledge, creativity, plays out throughout human history. The message is that neither absolute authority nor absolute freedom serves us well. We need balance, discernment, and the courage to question while maintaining wisdom. If the Anunnaki interbred with humans, then we carry their genetics, their potential, and perhaps their destiny. We're not simply the creations looking up at creators. We're descendants with the capacity to eventually equal or surpass them. The Anunnaki operate on vastly longer timescales than human civilizations. Their 3,600-year orbital period means that to them, human history is brief. This perspective changes how we think about progress, civilization, and our place in time. Most importantly, the Anunnaki story is unfinished. They departed with promises to return. Whether literal or metaphorical, this suggests human history has not reached its conclusion. We're in an intermediate phase, developing independently, but potentially awaiting reunion with our cosmic family. Virtually every ancient tradition speaks of a return. Gods coming back to Earth, Judgment Day, a golden age restored, the kingdom of heaven established on Earth. These prophecies appear so universally that they demand attention beyond mere religious mythology. Mesopotamian prophecies speak of Nibiru's return, when the gods would come back to evaluate humanity's progress. They would judge whether we had proven worthy of continued existence or whether we needed correction or even elimination, as with the flood. Biblical eschatology describes beings descending from heaven, cosmic conflicts, and the establishment of a new order. The descriptions of New Jerusalem, a massive cubic city descending from the sky with specific dimensions, sounds remarkably like a spacecraft or space station rather than a spiritual metaphor. Hindu prophecy. The Kali Yuga, or Age of Darkness, will end with the return of Kalki, the final avatar, arriving on a white horse to restore Dharma. This cyclic view sees history as repeated patterns of divine intervention, golden ages, decline, and renewal. Hopi prophecies. Native American traditions speak of sky people who will return when humanity reaches a critical point. Blue star Kachina will appear, signaling the end of the current age and transition to a new one. Mayan calendar. The famous 2012 prophecy, though the date has passed, wasn't about the end of the world, but about the end of a cycle and the beginning of a new age of enlightenment or transformation. The consistency is striking. Something or someone is expected to return. Humanity is being evaluated. A transformation or judgment approaches. Whether these prophecies describe literal events or archetypal patterns of human consciousness evolution, they shape how billions of people understand their place in cosmic history. If we accept even the possibility that humanity was genetically engineered or influenced by an advanced species, it raises profound questions about where human evolution is heading. Natural selection operates on all species, but humans have increasingly intervened in our own evolution through medicine, technology, genetic engineering, and cultural evolution that outpaces biological change. We're becoming self-directed evolution, shaping our own future genetic and technological development.
Consider our trajectory. Extended longevity. We're slowly increasing human longevity through medical advances, approaching the centuries-long lives attributed to antediluvian humans. Genetic modification. CRISPR and gene therapy mean we can now modify human genetics, potentially eliminating diseases or enhancing capabilities. Cybernetic enhancement. Integration of technology with biology through prosthetics, implants, and brain-computer interfaces. Artificial intelligence. Creating intelligence potentially exceeding our own, raising questions about what happens when we're no longer Earth's most intelligent species. Space exploration. Beginning to venture off-world, potentially becoming a multi-planetary species. Are these developments natural evolutionary progress, or are we unconsciously following a template set by our creators? Are we recreating the Anunnaki pattern, developing the technology and capability to travel to other worlds, genetically modify species, and potentially create our own hybrid intelligent beings? If the Anunnaki created us in their image, perhaps not just physically, but in terms of our developmental trajectory, then we're following a path they set long ago. We're becoming like them, for better or worse. One of the deepest aspects of the Anunnaki story is the question of consciousness itself. What did Enki really give humanity when he provided the forbidden knowledge? Was it merely intelligence and reproductive capability, or was it something more profound? Self-awareness, moral reasoning, spiritual consciousness. Many spiritual traditions distinguish between humans and animals based on consciousness rather than mere intelligence. Animals can be intelligent, but humans possess something additional: awareness of awareness, the ability to contemplate existence itself, moral agency, and the capacity for abstract thought. The Anunnaki texts suggest this level of consciousness wasn't part of humanity's original design. We were created as workers, intelligent enough for tasks, but not for questioning our role or purpose. Enki's intervention upgraded us to full consciousness, making us truly human rather than merely intelligent animals. This raises fascinating possibilities. Are there levels of consciousness beyond what we currently experience? If we were upgraded once, could we be upgraded again? What would the next level of consciousness look like? The mystics, shamans, and advanced meditators who report expanded states of awareness might be accessing capabilities that are latent in human genetics but not yet fully activated. Is consciousness itself Anunnaki technology? Some theories suggest that consciousness isn't a product of biological processes, but something that can be engineered, transmitted, or modified. That the Anunnaki gave humanity not just modified genetics, but an implanted consciousness matrix that makes us who we are. Can we evolve our own consciousness? Through meditation, psychedelics, technology, or other means, humans have always sought expanded awareness. Perhaps we're unconsciously trying to access levels of consciousness that were our birthright, but have been dormant or suppressed. We began this story with gold, the Anunnaki's original purpose for coming to Earth. But gold's significance extends beyond ancient history into modern times in ways that might not be coincidental. Historical value. Throughout human history, gold has held unique status. It's been money, stored wealth, religious symbol, and status marker. Why? It's relatively useless for practical purposes, too soft for tools, too rare for construction, yet every civilization values it intensely. The Anunnaki explanation: we were taught to value gold by beings who needed it desperately. This cultural programming persists thousands of years after the original need vanished. We continue mining, hoarding, and treasuring gold because we're following instructions imprinted on human culture at its inception.
Modern technology. Interestingly, gold has become crucial in modern electronics. It's the best conductor that doesn't corrode, making it essential for reliable electrical contacts. Our computers, phones, and satellites all require gold. We've discovered practical uses for gold that might align with whatever the Anunnaki needed it for. Advanced technology requiring perfect conductivity.
Monetary system. The gold standard, though abandoned by most nations, still underlies global monetary confidence. Central banks hoard gold reserves. In financial crises, gold becomes the ultimate safe haven. Why does this ancient metal retain such psychological and economic importance in a digital age? Alchemy and transformation. The ancient practice of alchemy, attempting to transform base metals into gold, takes on new meaning. Were alchemists trying to recreate Anunnaki manufacturing processes? The symbolic aspect, gold representing spiritual perfection and transformation, might encode literal technological processes that became mystified over time. Recent scientific discoveries have made Mars increasingly relevant to the Anunnaki discussion. NASA missions have revealed that Mars once had a thick atmosphere, liquid water, and possibly life. Something catastrophic happened. The atmosphere was stripped away, the water vanished, and the surface became the dead, cold desert we see today. Some researchers examining ancient Sumerian texts note references to Mars as one of the way stations between Nibiru and Earth. Mars being between Earth and the outer solar system would be a logical stopping point for spacecraft traveling from Nibiru's orbit to Earth. Ancient texts describe Mars as the staging ground or crossing place. Could Mars have once been a thriving Anunnaki colony, only to be destroyed in the ancient conflicts described in the texts? The massive impact basins on Mars, particularly the Hellas Basin, show evidence of catastrophic events. Cydonia region. The controversial face on Mars and nearby pyramidal structures in the Cydonia region have sparked decades of debate. While most scientists explain these as natural formations seen under specific lighting conditions, some researchers see artificial structures, monuments left by whoever inhabited Mars before its catastrophe. Underground bases. If Mars once had an Anunnaki presence, logic suggests they would have built underground facilities for protection from radiation and temperature extremes. Current Mars missions are beginning to explore lava tubes and subsurface regions where such facilities might remain intact. Human Mars mission. Our drive to reach Mars, to establish colonies there, might not be random. If we carry Anunnaki genetics and cultural programming, perhaps we're unconsciously returning to a world that was once part of our extended family's domain. Antarctica holds special fascination in alternative history circles, and recent discoveries have only intensified the speculation. This frozen continent, buried under miles of ice for thousands of years, may hold secrets relevant to the Anunnaki story. Ancient maps. The Piri Reis map and other ancient cartographic documents show Antarctica's coastline as it would appear without ice, suggesting either ice-free conditions within human observation times or aerial surveys conducted before the ice formed. Pyramid structures. Satellite imagery has revealed what appear to be pyramidal peaks in Antarctica, though conventional geology explains these as natural mountain formations. However, some display geometries suspiciously similar to artificial pyramids elsewhere. Nazi interest.
Historical records confirm that Nazi Germany conducted expeditions to Antarctica in the 1930s and established base camps there. Rumors of their discoveries, ancient ruins, advanced technology, or even contact with non-human intelligence persist despite lack of solid evidence. Modern discoveries. Recent ice core drilling and ice-penetrating radar have revealed massive subglacial structures, including what appears to be ancient riverbeds, lake systems, and possibly artificial structures. The scientific establishment proceeds cautiously, but the discoveries continue. Preserved evidence. If a catastrophic flood occurred as described in ancient texts, Antarctica, which had temperate climate before polar shift or ice age onset, would have preserved structures and evidence under ice. This creates a perfect time capsule, potentially holding proof of pre-flood advanced civilization. One of the most intriguing genetic anomalies in humans is the Rh-negative blood type. Approximately 15% of humans lack the Rh factor protein found in Rh-positive blood and in all primates. The origin of Rh-negative blood remains medically mysterious. Characteristics often associated with Rh-negative individuals. Higher IQ averages in some studies, lower body temperature, higher blood pressure, unusual sensitivity to heat and light, extra vertebrae in some cases, enhanced psychic abilities according to anecdotal reports, complications during pregnancy when Rh-negative mother carries Rh-positive child. From an evolutionary standpoint, Rh-negative is puzzling. The pregnancy complications should have eliminated the trait through natural selection. Rh-negative mothers' immune systems attack Rh-positive fetuses, causing miscarriage or severe complications without medical intervention.
The trait appears suddenly in the genetic record, with highest concentrations in Basque populations, 30% plus Rh-negative, and European bloodlines. It doesn't appear in the evolutionary tree leading to modern humans. It's simply present, without clear ancestral origin. Alternative explanation, Rh-negative blood represents Anunnaki or hybrid genetics. The pregnancy complications occur because Rh-negative, Anunnaki genetics, and Rh-positive, standard human genetics, are incompatible. Exactly what we'd expect from attempted hybridization between different species. This doesn't mean Rh-negative individuals are superior or more pure in any meaningful sense. We are all mixed after hundreds of thousands of years. But it might be a marker, a genetic fingerprint of ancient interventions that still expresses in some bloodlines. Ancient Sumerian texts pay special attention to Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. The Dogon tribe of Mali in West Africa possessed detailed knowledge about Sirius B, a white dwarf star orbiting Sirius A that's invisible to the naked eye and wasn't discovered by modern astronomy until 1862. The Dogon claimed this knowledge was given to them by the Nomo, amphibious beings who came from the Sirius system in ancient times and taught them about astronomy, agriculture, and civilization. Their description of these teacher beings aligns remarkably well with Mesopotamian descriptions of the Apkallu, often depicted as fishmen who emerged from the sea to teach humanity. Could the Anunnaki have had bases on planets orbiting Sirius? Some interpretations of ancient texts suggest Nibiru's orbit isn't simply around our sun, but follows a binary pattern involving Sirius as a second focal point, explaining its extremely long orbital period. The ancient Egyptians aligned their entire religious calendar around Sirius. The heliacal rising of Sirius, its first visible appearance at dawn after a period of being too close to the sun to see, marked the new year and predicted the Nile's flooding.
The precision of Egyptian astronomical observations of Sirius surpasses what naked-eye observations should allow. Why this obsession with Sirius across multiple ancient cultures? The Anunnaki explanation: Sirius held significance to the gods themselves, either as a home system, a waypoint, or the location of another advanced civilization with whom they had contact. In recent years, particularly following Pentagon acknowledgments of unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, the question of government knowledge about non-human intelligence has moved from fringe conspiracy theory to mainstream discussion. If the Anunnaki story is true, or even partially true, governments would likely have discovered evidence through archaeological expeditions to sensitive sites, translation of ancient texts by intelligence agencies, recovery of anomalous artifacts or technology, contact with surviving Anunnaki or their representatives, information from secret societies with preserved knowledge. The question of disclosure becomes, do governments know about humanity's true origins? If so, why keep it secret? Possible reasons for secrecy: social stability, revealing that humanity was created as a slave species by extraterrestrial beings would fundamentally challenge religious beliefs, social structures, and human self-perception. Economic disruption: if Anunnaki technology exists and could provide free energy, advanced medicine, or other world-changing capabilities, it would destroy existing economic systems. Power preservation: elite bloodlines claiming Anunnaki descent might want to maintain their privileged status by keeping the full story hidden. Defense concerns: if the Anunnaki or other species might return, governments may be preparing in secret while avoiding public panic. Agreement obligations: perhaps contact has been maintained with remaining Anunnaki or their representatives, with agreements preventing disclosure. Alternatively, governments may know little more than the public. The compartmentalization of information, the loss of ancient knowledge, and the dismissal of alternative theories by mainstream institutions might mean the truth is hidden not through active conspiracy, but through institutional blindness. As we approach our conclusion, let's address the personal dimension. If the Anunnaki story is true, what does it mean for you individually? Your origins: you're not just the product of random evolution, but part of a deliberate design. This gives meaning to existence beyond mere survival and reproduction. You're here for a reason, even if that reason has evolved beyond the original intent. Your potential: the conflict between Enlil, limitation, and Enki, potential, plays out within each person. You have capabilities beyond what you're told you should have because you carry genetics from beings who created you to be more than you were originally designed to be.
Your destiny. You're part of an unfinished story. Whether the Anunnaki return literally or whether humanity achieves independence and maturity on its own, you're living in a transitional age. Your choices and development matter to the species' future. Your consciousness. The awareness you possess, your ability to question, to wonder, to seek truth, was given at great cost by those who loved humanity enough to defy authority. Honor that gift by using it fully, questioning everything, seeking truth wherever it leads. Your connection. You're not isolated or alone. You're connected to a cosmic story spanning hundreds of thousands of years, to beings who walked this earth when it was young, to a family tree that branches into the stars themselves. Your responsibility. With knowledge comes responsibility. If you accept that humanity was created, modified, abandoned, and left to develop independently, then you accept responsibility for what we become. We're not victims of our origins, but authors of our future. For many people encountering the Anunnaki story deeply for the first time, there's an integration challenge. How do you reconcile this narrative with your existing beliefs, education, and worldview? For the religious, the Anunnaki story doesn't necessarily contradict religious belief, it recontextualizes it. The divine can work through many instruments, and the Anunnaki could be angels, servants of a higher creator, or metaphors for spiritual principles. Many religious people find ways to integrate ancient astronaut theories with their faith, seeing it as explaining how rather than contradicting why. For the scientist, the scientific method requires evidence, and the Anunnaki story admittedly rests on interpretation of ancient texts, anomalous artifacts, and circumstantial evidence rather than proof. But science also requires openness to new data and willingness to revise theories when evidence demands it. The challenge is investigating with rigor while maintaining open-minded skepticism. For the skeptic, healthy skepticism is valuable. It protects against accepting false claims. But skepticism can become dogmatic when it refuses to examine evidence that challenges established narratives. The invitation is to examine the evidence fairly, understand the arguments seriously, and then reach your own conclusions. For the believer, if you accept the Anunnaki story, the challenge is discernment. Not every claim is true just because it's alternative. Not every ancient text is accurately translated. Not every interpretation is valid. Critical thinking remains essential even when exploring unconventional theories. The goal isn't necessarily to convince you that the Anunnaki story is literally factually true in every detail. The goal is to present the narrative fully, examine the evidence honestly, and allow you to consider possibilities that mainstream narratives don't accommodate. Throughout this journey, we've discussed the Anunnaki departure, but some theories suggest they never completely left. Various claims propose ongoing Anunnaki presence or influence. Underground bases. Ancient texts mention the Abzu, Enki's subterranean realm. Some interpret this as underground facilities where Anunnaki could survive in suspended animation or continue living away from human observation. Deep underground military bases, DUMBS, and unexplained seismic activity spark speculation about hidden civilizations beneath the surface. Shape-shifting elite. The most controversial claim suggests certain Anunnaki or their hybrid descendants can alter their appearance, living among humans in positions of power, the so-called reptilian elite theory. This strains credibility, but reflects ancient myths about gods assuming human form. Dimensional existence. Perhaps the Anunnaki didn't leave physically, but shifted to a different dimensional frequency. They remain present but invisible, observing and occasionally influencing, while minimizing direct intervention. This would explain UFO sightings, paranormal phenomena, and experiences of divine contact. Bloodline preservation. Secret societies and elite families might genuinely preserve higher concentrations of Anunnaki genetics, along with knowledge and technology passed down through initiatory lineages. Not a conspiracy to enslave humanity, but a group maintaining contact and preparing for eventual reunion. Periodic visitation. Rather than constant presence, perhaps the Anunnaki visit periodically, during key historical moments, to specific individuals, or to monitor humanity's progress. UFO phenomena might represent these check-ins rather than invasion or colonization. Waiting for maturity. The most hopeful interpretation is that the Anunnaki are waiting for humanity to mature, to reach a level of development where we can interact as equals rather than as subordinates. They're watching, hoping we'll achieve independence and worthiness to join the cosmic community. Intellectual honesty requires acknowledging the serious criticisms of Anunnaki theories. Translation controversies.
Mainstream Sumerologists dispute many of Zecharia Sitchin's translations. They argue he mistranslated texts, read meanings into words that don't exist, and cherry-picked evidence while ignoring contradictory information. Without original language expertise, most people can't independently verify translations.
Scientific problems. The proposed mechanics of Nibiru's orbit are problematic. A planet on a 3,600-year elliptical orbit passing through the inner solar system would gravitationally disrupt planetary orbits, causing catastrophes every passage. We don't see evidence of such regular catastrophes in the geological record. Archaeological silence. Mainstream archaeology has excavated countless Mesopotamian sites without finding the advanced technology that should exist if the Anunnaki story is true. Where are the spacecraft parts, the advanced tools, the physical evidence of beings with capabilities far beyond Bronze Age humans? Circular reasoning. Critics argue ancient astronaut theories explain anomalies by invoking aliens, then use those anomalies as proof aliens existed, a circular logic that isn't scientifically valid. Modern mythology. Some scholars suggest the Anunnaki theory is modern mythology, a contemporary creation myth that answers modern anxieties about human origins, purpose, and place in the cosmos, using ancient texts as raw material for new narratives. Cherry-picking. The theory selects evidence that fits while dismissing contradictory information. When mainstream explanations exist, even if challenging, alternative theories shouldn't automatically take precedence. These criticisms have merit and deserve consideration. The Anunnaki story, like any theory about ancient history, must be evaluated critically against evidence, logic, and alternative explanations. Given the controversy and the limitations of evidence, what can we actually know with confidence? What we know. Ancient Mesopotamian civilizations possessed sophisticated knowledge in astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and engineering. Their origin myths consistently describe gods descending from heaven and creating or teaching humanity. Anomalous artifacts and structures worldwide challenge conventional explanations of ancient technological capabilities. Human origins remain incompletely understood, with genetic bottlenecks and recent emergence of modern human traits requiring explanation. Ancient texts contain detailed information that seems anachronistic for their time period. What remains uncertain? Whether ancient descriptions of gods should be interpreted as extraterrestrial beings or as metaphor and mythology. Whether anomalous evidence represents advanced ancient human technology, extraterrestrial influence, or misinterpretation. Whether Nibiru exists as a physical planet or represents symbolic or astronomical concepts. The degree to which modern humans carry non-terrestrial genetics. Whether any ongoing contact or influence exists today. What we cannot currently prove. The literal existence of the Anunnaki as described, the specific mechanisms of human creation or modification, the precise timeline of events described in ancient texts, the current location or status of the Anunnaki, the likelihood or timing of any return. The intellectually honest position acknowledges both the compelling nature of the evidence and its limitations. We can say with confidence that ancient history is more complex than mainstream narratives suggest, without claiming absolute certainty about extraterrestrial intervention. As we reach the end of the Anunnaki saga, we must acknowledge something fundamental. This story isn't over. Whether interpreted as literal history, symbolic mythology, or thought-provoking speculation, the questions it raises remain active and relevant. We stand at a threshold. Humanity is developing capabilities that ancient texts attributed to the gods: genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, space travel, life extension. We're becoming like the Anunnaki were described to be. This isn't coincidence,
It's either evidence that we're following a template set by our creators, or proof that technological species naturally follow similar developmental paths. We remain seekers. The questions that drove ancient humans to wonder about their origins, purpose, and destiny continue to drive us. Who are we? Why are we here? Are we alone? Do we have cosmic family? These aren't just philosophical questions, they shape how we see ourselves and how we live. We preserve memory. Whether through ancient texts, oral traditions, genetic inheritance, or some deeper collective consciousness, humanity retains echoes of our origins. These memories surface in myths, dreams, religious experiences, and intuitive knowledge that defies conventional explanation. We await reunion. Whether literal return of the Anunnaki, first contact with other extraterrestrial species, or simply humanity's maturation into cosmic citizenship, something is anticipated. Prophecies across all cultures speak of transformation, judgment, awakening, or return. Perhaps these reflect deep human longing for meaning, or perhaps they're accurate predictions of what approaches. We are becoming. The story of the Anunnaki and humanity isn't about what we were, it's about what we're becoming. We're no longer primitive workers laboring in mines. We're conscious, questioning, creative beings, pushing the boundaries of what's possible. We're writing the next chapters of this story ourselves. Thank you for joining me on this extensive journey through one of humanity's most fascinating alternative histories. Whether you're watching this at dawn or midnight, whether you're skeptical or convinced, whether this confirmed your existing beliefs or challenged them, I hope it's been worth your time. The Anunnaki story does something important regardless of its literal truth. It expands our perspective. It reminds us that history might be more complex than we're taught, that our origins might be more mysterious than we assume, and that our destiny might be more cosmic than we imagine. In your comments below, let me know, what part of this story resonated most strongly with you? What questions do you still have? What evidence would convince you one way or another? How does this narrative change or confirm your worldview? Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? The discussion doesn't end here. It continues in your thoughts, your conversations, and your own research into these profound questions about human origins and destiny. Whether the Anunnaki were literal beings from another planet, symbolic representations of forces that shaped human development, or entirely mythological, their story challenges us to think bigger about who we are, where we come from, and where we're headed. The stars are waiting, the questions remain open, and the story continues with each of us writing our part in humanity's ongoing cosmic journey. Thank you for spending these 5 hours with me. Until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and keep looking up at those stars, because somewhere up there might be answers we're only beginning to imagine. Good night, good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. May your search for truth lead you to wisdom, and may wisdom lead you to understanding our place in this vast, mysterious, and wonderful universe. The end, or perhaps the beginning.